Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hi, and welcome to this week's You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm glad you joined me. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Koch. She is the author of Start with the Heart, How to Motivate Your Kids to be Compassionate, Responsible, and Brave, even when you're not around. It's one of her new books. And she's also the founder and president of Celebrate Kids, a Christian ministry based in Fort Worth, Texas. And Kathy, I am thrilled to have you on my show today.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Now, motivating our kids to do the right thing. I mean, that is hard. As my listeners know, I have 4 children, and I think that's something that we all struggle with at all time. Why do we struggle with the motivation part of parenting?
Oh, my goodness. You know, one of the things that we need to understand is that all kids are motivated. And I think this is part of the struggle. Some kids are motivated for apathy, and you want them motivated for, energy and attention. Some kids are motivated for disobedience because it gets them attention, or in some cases, it decreases pressure. We don't think they can do as well when they're disobedient, so they choose to be disobedient to take pressure off of them academically, perhaps. And so I think part of the struggle for us is to ask the right question, which is, how do I redirect my children's motivation in the right direction, not how do I get them motivated? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, perfect sense. And I think about my own kids, and I realized 2 things early on when they were younger. One, I could not make them do anything, right? And number 2, I really wanted to make them choose the right thing. So we have that tension, and as Christians, we are also, part of that tension, I think, comes from the fact that our children's misbehavior is that window into their heart. And when we see them, like you put it, motivated to do the wrong thing, that grieves us as parents.
Right. And then if we're honest, too, sometimes it's a reflection of our behavior. We are modeling in front of our children all of the time. And so when we see them be impatient, critical, stingy, whatever, unkind, could it be that they've noticed us being that way lately, and that makes us nervous? Then we lash out at them because we don't want to have to deal with our own stuff. And that's just reality, and it's such a shame. I totally get it.
Yeah, it is hard, isn't it? Because I often find that when I'm being hard on one of my kids for something, I'm like, yeah, am I struggling with that? I think maybe right. I am. So another thing that you talk about in your book is you talk about beliefs that affect behavior. Could you just talk a little bit more about what you mean by that and how that plays into the motivation aspect?
Yeah, I'd love to, Sarah. Thank you. If we only try to change the external behavior that we observe, then it really is behavior management. Like I can get any kid you give me to stop rolling his eyes at you as a sign of disrespect. But just because he changes his behavior does not mean he has changed his opinion of you. Beliefs cause behavior. So we constantly need to be asking ourselves, what is my child believing that is causing his choice? And all behavior is a choice.
Right.
What is he believing that is causing his behavior? Because if I don't deal with that, then all I'm doing is, we use the analogy at Celebrate Kids of kill the spider versus sweep away the web. I can sweep away all the spider webs at the windowsill in my kitchen, and I can feel so good about myself in my kitchen. And then the very next day I come out there, and what's there? The spider webs, because I never found the spider and dealt with the real issue. So beliefs cause behavior. So let's observe our children more intentionally. Let's listen longer. Let's observe them in a variety of different situations and see if we can figure out, is there a belief towards self that is causing the behavior? Is there a belief toward the family, toward the culture, toward spelling that is causing their behavior? And we need to talk with them about that in order to make a change in their behavior, which will actually then be a heart change, which then is more likely to stay constant.
Right. And I think that's so important. I think about one of my own kids who when I would say, well, why do you keep doing, let's talk about why you keep doing this particular misbehavior. And he's like, well, I don't want to, but I don't know how to change. And I think that kind of goes along with it. It wasn't that he was wanting to do this. He didn't want to do it, but that he wasn't sure how to replace it. And I think your book also talks about giving them some tools to, replace those bad behaviors or that to find that right motivation to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate that you discovered that. And let me affirm you, Sarah, most kids, even a lot of adults, we're not aware of why we do what we do. We've got to slow down and really be, willing to go internal and to try to figure this out. And it takes humility and teachability and respect, to be able to do that. And a lot of children, especially if they're younger, they're not going to be able to verbalize for us, well, Mommy, it's because of this that I do that, which is why we need to observe, and we can maybe,
right,
interview them in kind of a casual way, and we can do maybe even a verbal multiple choice. Is it because of this, or this? Are you lashing out? Are you angry toward your brother because he won the game? Or are you, and then watch for what I call that eyebrow lift. Their eyes will often give them away when you say the thing right. And you did discover in the book, one of the things I talk about is the change process of taking off the old and putting on the new. And so, and that's a biblical concept that's found in Ephesians 4:22-24, that we are told to take off our old self, which is corrupted, put on a new self, created to be like God. And that middle verse is renew the mind or change the mind, and that's done with the Holy Word of God. And so kids and adults, when we need to change and when our kids need to change, I can almost guarantee you there's something to take off, impatience, something to put on, patience, something to take off, jealousy, and something to put on, other-centeredness and kindness and respect for others. And when we can identify both of those things and talk with our kids more about what we want than about what we currently see, then change is more likely. And that is a big thing in the book, theme of the book, because if we're talking about how to motivate kids, we're obviously trying to influence them and change them and get them moving in the right direction.
Right. And I think that and I love what you said about focusing on the positive instead of the negative. That's something I've been trying to, for several years now, replace with my own kids. Instead of saying, well, you need to not be X negative behavior or emotion, whatever. But instead, let's work on a positive and try to encourage them that way, because they don't, they probably really don't want to be an angry kid all the time. But they probably, they don't, because, negative, as you know, negative emotions take so much more energy and they cause so much more stress, and even in the child and the atmosphere and the family. But trying to refocus that on positive emotions and more positive character traits can make you feel better as a parent too. And I'm more happy to work with my kids on being kind, as opposed to working on them for not, hitting their brother every time they don't like what he did.
Right. And one of the reasons that that's so valuable, Sarah, is that identity controls behavior. Who we think we are is who we will be. We have something called self-consistency. So if we say to a child, you're so rude, you are so rude, I'm really tired of how rude you are. Well, guess what that child's going to be good at?
Being rude.
Right. And they'll sometimes say to me, Dr. Kathy, I really don't want my mom upset with me. She says I'm rude. I don't really even know what that is, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be instead. And they're not making that up. We don't tend to, slow down and think about the vocabulary that we're using with our children. So what's the behavior that has caused us to judge them as being rude? And again, what would the belief be? And then what is the opposite that we expect to see from them? And let's use that vocabulary. I need you to be, kinder towards your grandmother. I need you to wait more patiently and not make your brother feel stupid when it takes him longer to learn something because he's little. That's the kind of thing we need to say.
Yeah, and I find that when we do say that as parents, the response in our kids is kind of amazing on some levels. We don't think of it like, oh, wow, but just changing that language can really change the tenor. It really makes our kids, I think, feel like we are on their side, as opposed to being like their enemy, to always telling them what not to do.
Absolutely. I think it gives them hope. I think it gives them something to strive for. I just spoke at a convention a few days ago, and I asked my audience, there were hundreds of parents in the room, and I just said at the beginning of my seminar, I said, how many of you like hanging out with critical people? Not a single person is his or her hand. Like, surprise, none of us gravitate toward critical people. None of us feel safe with people who are always only pointing out what is wrong. And, the reality is you've chosen to be a parent, praise God. And your reality is that you must really have kind of a red pen mentality at times towards your kids. It is a responsibility that we have from our Creator to raise up our children well, and that does mean that we point out their faults, their sin, and we do it with compassion, grace, mercy, truth. I hope we do it at the right time and the right way for the right motives, not that we're controlling and powerful, but it's for their own good. And yet, I know what I know. It really works best when you also, kind of my joke is, carry a green pen as well. And talk about, with an enthusiasm and a positive, encouraging spirit, what they're doing well and what have you noticed that they've improved on. And, when we talk about those things, then we give them hope that they can improve, because now they know they have strengths that they can use when looking at a negative that they want to change.
Right. And the other, I think alongside that is that I know I do not feel like a very good person when I'm nagging at my kids. When I'm being that negative, you need to do, and I'm negative about what they need to do. You need to pick up your books. I've told you 1,000 times, and I probably have. Okay, let's just be honest.
Right.
To do this. And yet I realize that is, then my kid feels bad and he does it. But then, like we were talking about earlier, now his belief is that, well, I can never remember to do this.
Right.
And I never want, so in my own life, I've been trying to replace those with, a less negative way to remind them by my tone and the way that I phrase it, in that nagging way that we all know our mothers did it to us. We did, that we all know that we do, but that's really hard. I mean, it's hard to replace that. Do you have any other, encouragement for parents who are struggling with this? Any other insights on how we can replace those?
Sometimes, it's great. And really, Sarah, thanks for your humility, because you're not alone in this. No one likes to nag. That's why I have a whole chapter in my book about being a teacher, coach, cheerleader, and referee. And if people feel like they've only been referees lately, only nagging, only pointing out sin, then it's possible that they haven't been teaching and coaching and cheering lately. So that's a whole other discussion. But I would say that, oh dear, your question was something else to do. I should not have done that bunny trail into a new. Oh, I know. Thank you. The Holy Spirit reminded me. I apologize. If your children are old enough, and if you've been clear, then sometimes we need to stand there and say, what should you be doing instead? And let them discover that they do know what is right, and they either verbalize it or they go ahead and they do it in front of us, and then we affirm them and say, yes, Peter, I knew that you knew. It's a habit you have of being lazy, or it's a habit you have of being negative, but I know that you are learning what is right. Thank you for telling me that. Because if we always tell them what to do, then they believe that they really don't know, and we begin to think they don't know. They never listen, when in fact he did know what to do. He just wasn't able to do it. Either he's young without self-control, or, he's young and emotion got the best of him. And, that happens to all of us. So I like that idea sometimes of asking our children, what could you be doing instead?
Oh, yeah. I love that, Kathy, because it also helps them take that responsibility that we need to be building in our children.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll often, like my two boys, they're 10 and 12, and one of their jobs is to unload the dishwasher. Well, the dishwasher is not run on we don't run it on Mondays, and when, it's run when it's full. Mm-hmm. So there's visual cues. There's a little magnet we stick on top to let them know. But I also will say, there's something in the kitchen that needs your attention. or, there's something extra chore that you need to do to, something like that, where it's a little bit of a direction, but it's not, you need to unload the dishwasher.
Right.
Which I found is more helpful, because then sometimes they'll come back and say, okay, yes, I see that I need to do the dishwasher. I'm going to do X and I'll be back to do it. And I'm like, great. And then they come back and they do it, rather than me saying, hey, you need to do it now because I'm going to forget to remind you, so I mean, it's that kind of tension I think we have to want to create that responsibility in our children. And also, we do have to do some of that reminding, like you were saying.
Right. And when we do it right, like I love that example, they feel more grown up, right? They feel like we've trusted them. And in fact, we have trusted them. And that's what creates a healthy independence. My book has the title, as you mentioned, Responsible in it, How to Raise Responsible Kids. And the reason I chose that as one of the 3 character qualities in the title was how many parents were telling me their kids are so irresponsible and just so irritating. And, I could go on and on. So anything that we can do to increase our kids' choices to be responsible, the first time and to remember on their own, absolutely so important. It builds them up and it grows them up. And that's what we want for our children.
And I think also your point about it does make them feel grown up. I'm not sure I've shared this with my podcast listeners before, but when my one of my sons was 8, I told him, okay, you're getting a new chore and you can vacuum now. And he did this fist pump in the air. He goes, yeah, I'm old enough to vacuum.
I love that.
It was hilarious. Not that every time his time to vacuum came around that he was that excited, but it was like this responsibility that we felt he could have. He saw it as kind of he saw his older sisters doing it, and now it was like his turn to learn how to do it. And that enthusiasm, not all my kids are like that. He's the only one who ever gets like fist pumps about doing, things like when he's mowing the grass and he's super excited about that. It's really kind of funny. But I love that, trying to create that, when we give them more responsibility, that it's a kind of a grown-up thing, that they're growing. And this is partly why, you're old enough now to do these things instead of it's time for you to do it. I think sometimes our language, we can, have a little more encouragement with that to help them with that internal motivation.
Oh, totally. Tone of voice, body language, the whole thing. Sarah, some kids have told me that they think that we're excited they're old enough to do something so that we don't have to do it anymore.
Right.
and that might be true. That really might be true. But it can't be about us. It really needs to be, we're excited for you and you've demonstrated maturity. You've demonstrated that you care about excellence when you do the other chores that we've assigned you to. And we're excited that you've now, turned 9 and now it's your turn to learn this. And I tell kids all the time, the family unit, it's ordained by God. It's a very significant thing to be a part of a family. And you were chosen for this family. And there are things that we do within groups, whether it's a corporate group or a church committee or a family unit. We live, work, love, learn together. And this is your way of participating. This is your way of contributing. And, mom does this and dad does this and your sister does this. And guess what? This month you get to do this. And that's cool for the kids to understand that it is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that so many times when I talk to parents, especially when my kids were all under 10 and, chores would come up and I would mention, all the things my kids did, and they did a lot. They do more now that they're older, but they still did a lot. And they're like, wow, how do you get them to do all that? I'm like, well, it wasn't really a choice. Do you want to learn to wash dishes? And number 2, it was that kind of family team. I often talk about when they start complaining. I said, you use that bathroom, you eat the food, you consume, and rather than having them be consumers, we're helping them to learn life skills so they can know how to put together a meal and clean a house. And, I'm not sending them out to the world unprepared. One. Right. And 2, but they're part of our family, so we're a team. And I love that, you touched on that, because I think we get lost when we're all going in all these different directions, that really function well as a family, we do need to function as kind of a team. And part of that is responsibility around the house and other things like that.
Absolutely. And, realistically, too, it gives us more time for fun and for activities. And I think that's very legitimate, too, for kids to understand that if we all come together, then there's more time to play checkers or to shoot hoops in the driveway. And that is the way it is. And
right.
That, shouldn't children learn respect for others and other-centeredness and character traits of helpfulness first in the family? If they can't do that in the family, why would we ever think they could do it outside of our home? And I think that we lose sight of that. It's not an obligation, it's a privilege. But again, that's a mindset for a mom and a dad to have toward their children.
Yeah, and sometimes I think we do get lost with that in the day-to-day busyness of our lives. And our family firmly believes that, it's important for them to have time to do chores, to contribute to the family that way. So we make sure that that's possible. I think we're pretty close to the end of our time, Kathy. Is there anything else about your book or parenting that you want to touch on before we sign off today?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to be on here. I think the book is, it's about character, it's about obedience, it's about learning, it's about, loving well. I just appreciate the chance to be here with you. It's not easy today. Kids are complex, the culture's chaotic, parents are busy and overwhelmed by their own stuff. So I tried to write a book that would be a practical and uplifting piece to encourage us to stay the course and to do this thing well called parenting. It's among the most important things, of course, that you will ever do.
Yeah, amen. And as my listeners know, part of my calling, I feel, is to encourage and then equip moms and dads so that you're not alone in this parenting journey. There's a lot of us out there, and we're all aiming for the same thing.
Amen. I hope so.
Well, you've been listening to You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hammaker, and I'm so glad you joined me today. My guest was Dr. Kathy Koch. She has a new book out called Start with the Heart, How to Motivate Your Kids to be Compassionate, Responsible, and Brave, even when you're not around. You can also find her online at Celebrate Kids is her group, and I hope that you'll check out her and her book. Thank you for being with me, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hammaker. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhammaker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.